The moment the crystal lights spilled across that dark wooden table, I knew this Thanksgiving dinner wasn't going to be like any we'd ever had before. My name's Lauren Mitchell, I'm 33, and my whole life I'd learned how to stay quiet in the very house where I was born. Sitting at the end of the table, I saw my father, Richard Mitchell, raise his glass of red wine. His voice carried that heavy authority as he said, "I have an important announcement that will change all of us." No one else at the table knew, but my heart was pounding because I realized right then, this was the moment every secret was about to spill out. My father, the man who built the Mitchell software empire, was about to announce the biggest decision of his life. He thought this was his stage, his final power move. What he didn't know is that I, the forgotten daughter, the one he always treated like an outsider, was holding the last card. The air in the room was thick. My brother Brandon tugged at his tie, convinced he was the star of the evening. My sister Sienna kept her phone up, filming for her Instagram followers. And my mom, Evelyn, sat quietly, clutching her Chardonnay glass the way she always did when she needed something to hold her together. In that moment, while every eye turned to my father, I couldn't help but smile. Because in just a few minutes, they'd all find out that the buyer of Mitchell Software wasn't some stranger. It was me. That Thanksgiving night didn't end with just turkey and pumpkin pie. It ended with a twist of fate, where I turned rejection into the sweetest revenge. Before that night exploded into chaos, let me take you back in time, to the Mitchell family, the place where I was born and raised, out in the suburbs of Boston. Our home wasn't some cozy wooden house like you'd see in a Hallmark movie. It was a white colonial mansion with 6 bedrooms, an indoor heated pool that ran all year, and a lawn so massive we needed 3 gardeners rotating shifts just to keep it trimmed. To the neighbors and New England's business circle, the Mitchells were the picture of the perfect American dream. But I knew better than anyone underneath that shiny surface were cracks that would never heal. Richard Mitchell, my father, ran the software company he inherited from my grandfather. What started as a tiny garage project grew into Mitchell Software, a multi-million-dollar business serving clients all across the U.S. To him, the company's success was the family's success. But the price was steep. Any real father-child bond got pushed aside. He spoke only one language: power. And me, the middle daughter, was never allowed to speak it. My older brother, Brandon, was the star of his world. He never really cared about software or tech, but because he was the eldest son, Dad handed him the title of vice president the day after graduation. Brandon spent more time on yachts or at cocktail parties than in boardrooms, but Dad still saw him as the rightful heir. For Brandon, family was just a stage to show off his trophies and the new women on his arm. Then there was my youngest sister, Sienna. She carved her own path by turning the Mitchell name into her personal brand online. With hundreds of thousands of followers, she filled Instagram with photos in our glossy wood-floored living room, our perfectly trimmed garden, or next to Mom's brand new Range Rover. She had zero role in the business, but online, she was the face of the Mitchell legacy so many people dreamed of. And Evelyn, my mother, a true Boston lady. Born into old money, schooled at a prestigious girls' academy, she chose, after marrying my father, to embody the perfect Mrs. Mitchell. Always dressed in designer outfits, always smiling at charity galas, and always pouring another glass of Chardonnay when she didn't want to fight. For us, she was the fragile bridge that held things together, but too often, she stayed silent when I needed her to stand by me. And then there was me, Lauren, the middle child, always standing outside the spotlight. Ever since I was little, I was obsessed with computers. I'd stay up late, eyes glued to an old CRT screen. I taught myself to code at 12, built my first app at 15, and got into MIT on a full scholarship. But every family dinner, when I eagerly shared a new idea, Dad would just smirk and turn to Brandon. Leave that stuff to people who understand the real world. On paper, the Mitchells looked flawless, a successful father, kids shining in their own ways, a graceful mother. But in reality, it was nothing more than a stage, each of us stuck in the roles we'd been assigned. I was never given the lead. And that silence, that emptiness became the spark for the storm that was coming. I still remember the day that shaped my whole life. I was 22, fresh out of MIT with honors. For months, I poured myself into one plan, a cloud computing solution that could put Mitchell Software a decade ahead. I prepped every number, every diagram, every page. In my head, this was my shot to prove to my dad that I could really contribute. That morning, I walked into the big conference room at headquarters in downtown Boston. Dark wood walls, portraits of past CEOs everywhere. It had that cold kind of power that I both feared and wanted. Brandon sat in the front row, arms folded, looking bored. Sienna wasn't there, she was shooting pics for a beauty campaign. My dad sat at the head of the table, serious, his eyes sharp behind his reading glasses. I hooked my laptop to the projector, took a deep breath, and started. For the first 10 minutes, I talked market trends, how tech giants were moving to the cloud. I pointed out the gap, where Mitchell Software could lead if we moved now. The numbers and charts showed potential revenue in the tens of millions. But when I got to the most important part, the rollout plan, my dad glanced at his watch, sighed, and signaled me to stop. His voice cut in, calm and cold. Enough. This is more than enough. The room went silent. I froze, my lips trembling. He gave that faint smile I'd known since I was a kid, the smile that says no. He turned to the board members. She'd just graduated, full of academic pipe dreams. We do real business here, not experiments. Our clients want stability, not flashy tech. Light laughter floated around the table, like an attempt to break the tension. But to me, it felt like a knife through my confidence. I forced myself to stay calm, packed up my laptop and papers, and slipped out. I could still hear my dad talking to Brandon about golf and yacht club stuff that had nothing to do with work. That night I sat alone in my old dorm room in Cambridge, staring at the plans and notes I'd spent months on. Shame twisted in my chest. I understood one thing clearly. To my dad, I'd never be the rightful heir. Not because I lacked talent, but because I wasn't Brandon. In that moment, I decided to leave Boston. I refused to be the smart but invisible daughter of the Mitchells anymore. I wanted to build my own empire. Success so loud, he couldn't ignore it. I wanted the day when, at some family dinner, he'd have to say out loud that I'd won. So, with a few $1,000s saved and an old suitcase, I left home for San Francisco, Silicon Valley, the only place I trusted to let a tech dream grow. On my last night in Boston, I stood on the porch of the old house and watched the yellow lights through the living room windows. Inside, my family laughed and talked together. Nobody noticed I was about to disappear. In that cold New England December wind, I promised myself, one day, they'll have to listen. San Francisco greeted me with steep hills and cold winds from the Golden Gate. I rented a tiny apartment in the Mission District, only a bit bigger than my college dorm. For scuffed walls, a window looking over a noisy alley, and a rickety wooden bed. That was everything I had. I had $4,800 in the bank savings from odd jobs. The first months were brutal. I took every freelance coding gig I could find, from patching a few lines in a crappy app to building cheap websites for local diners. I worked 80 hours a week. My eyes burned from the screen. My fingers went numb on the keyboard. Day after day, I lived on bulk ramen and watered-down coffee, stretching every single dollar. One winter night stands out like a breaking point. I got a notice that my electricity would be cut off the next morning. My bank balance only covered one thing: pay the electric bill so the apartment had light, or keep the server running for the product I was testing with a small startup client. I sat there staring at the bill, hands shaking from the cold, wrestling with the choice. In the end, I turned the lights off, pulled on an old sweater, and transferred the money to keep the server alive. The apartment went dark except for the laptop's pale glow on my face. I told myself, if I give up today, all those hard months mean nothing. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw San Francisco shining under a cold sun. I felt exhausted and steady at the same time. I knew the road I'd chosen wouldn't be easy. But in that struggle, I found a stubborn will I never knew I had. The years that followed were nonstop. I worked at a few startups to gain experience, then spent every saved dollar testing my own product. I lived in a damp apartment, sometimes coding while neighbors argued through the wall. On my 25th birthday, I bought a discounted cupcake from the corner shop, lit a candle, and blew it out alone. Even in that deep loneliness, a fire burned inside me. Prove Dad wrong. After 3 years, the effort started to pay off. I built a prototype of an integration platform that let old software systems talk smoothly to modern cloud services. It was basically an upgraded version of the plan my dad had scoffed at. The first client was a small logistics firm. They didn't pay much, but it was enough to hire 2 engineers. From there, things started to roll. I kept my identity secret. I didn't want anyone tying my success to the Mitchell name. Stone was born short for Lauren Elizabeth, but to the world it was an anonymous, cold, and hard-to-read tech founder. I liked it. I wanted my work judged on its own value, not by my family's shadow. I collapsed at my desk many nights at 3 in the morning, chest tight with exhaustion, but I still typed the last lines of code. And when the product ran smoothly on screen, when a client sent a thank you email, I knew I was on the right path. The calluses on my hands, the sleepless nights, the days of ramen and weak coffee, they all became a silent vow that one day I would return to that house in Boston. And when I did, I would not be the invisible daughter. I would come back like a storm. 3 years after that blackout night in my tiny apartment, my company was no longer just an idea. Under the name Summit Technologies, I started laying the foundation for a real empire. The integration product I'd built proved its worth. It helped businesses stuck with outdated systems move into the cloud era without tearing everything down. What my dad once laughed at had become the lifeline for hundreds of companies. With that first contract, I hired a few talented engineers, people who'd been underestimated just like me. We worked out of a small office in Soma, walls chipped with old white paint, desks pieced together from IKEA. But the place buzzed with energy. By day, we worked on client projects to keep the lights on. By night, we poured ourselves into building the core product. Word spread fast. In just 2 years, Summit grew from 3 people to 10, then 20. Venture capital firms came knocking, but I held on to most of the shares. I'd sworn I'd never let anyone else control my future again, not even flashy investors with deep pockets. In the tech world, the name Stone became a mystery people couldn't ignore. The press started calling me the hidden founder, the one who never gave interviews, who rarely showed up in public. At conferences, I changed my hair, wore glasses, and usually let my COO speak instead. All anyone knew was that Stone was a quiet genius, and that aura of secrecy only made Summit more magnetic. Meanwhile, back in Boston, my family still thought I was some failure drifting around California. But quietly, I expanded my reach. I didn't just build products. I made strategic moves, buying shares in companies that supplied key components to Mitchell Software. I studied every financial report, every contract, and positioned Summit as an invisible but vital link in my family's supply chain. The turning point came when we acquired a small company that served 2 of Mitchell Software's biggest clients. With that deal, Summit took control of part of the cash flow my dad once bragged about as the pillar of his empire. I didn't say a word, but inside I knew the showdown was getting closer. I remember one night, standing by the office window, looking out at the San Francisco Bay. The Bay Bridge lights stretched across the water like a silver ribbon. In my hand was a contract worth tens of millions, something I'd only dreamed of a decade earlier. But instead of celebrating, a chill ran down my spine. I realized every move I made wasn't just about success. It was about preparing for the day I'd sit back at that family table and force my father to face the truth. From the MIT girl my dad dismissed, I had become Stone, a figure the tech world both respected and feared. But for me, this was only the beginning. Because back then, I still hadn't revealed who I really was. And that silence, that mystery, was my sharpest weapon. 10 years after I slipped out of Boston, I came back for Thanksgiving. But I wasn't the MIT girl people looked down on anymore. I was the head of Summit Technologies, a $200 million company. And I chose to show up as a statement. My private jet touched down at Bedford Airport on a cold, early winter morning. A glossy black Bentley waited on the tarmac. I don't usually show off, but this trip was different. I wanted every detail to reflect the truth my family had ignored for a decade. As the car rolled past streets still lined with fading gold maples, my childhood came rushing back. The Mitchell house appeared, grand as ever, with its dark roof and white columns. The lawn was perfectly trimmed, a fall wreath hung on the front door, and warm yellow light spilled from the windows. On the surface, nothing had changed. But I wasn't the same at all. My mother, Evelyn, opened the door. Her eyes flicked to the Patek Philippe on my wrist, then to the Bottega Veneta bag in my hand. She hugged me, the faint scent of Chardonnay in her voice. "Lauren, you look so different. Is that a Rolex?"
"No, Mom. Patek," I said softly.
Inside, I found my father in his glossy wood-paneled study, wearing his reading glasses. He looked up and gave a thin smile. "Oh, you came too. Was the flight from California okay?"
"Great.
"I flew private."
Saves time."
His eyes wavered for a second, then the phone rang. He turned away and pushed me out of his mind, just like all those years before. I walked into the living room where Brandon was already planted on the sofa, a scotch in hand, his belly pressing against a tight shirt. He looked up and smirked. "Oh, little sis. Still glued to those computers?" "Pretty much," I said, smiling without bothering to explain. The door swung open. Sienna swept in, phone up, live streaming in her sweet voice. "Guys, guess who's back? Lauren Mitchell, my sister from San Francisco." She gave me a light hug, eyes on the bag, smile wide. "You look expensive. Finally got yourself a rich boyfriend?"
"No.
"Just hard work," I said, stepping out of the frame. Dad was still in the study on the phone. Through the half-closed door, I caught a line. "Yes, that's right. Summit Technologies. $50 million is the final offer." I held back a smile. He had no idea the person he'd been negotiating with for months was me. In the kitchen, Maria, our longtime housekeeper, met me with a real, warm smile. "Miss Lauren, you look so healthy. California agrees with you." "Thank you, Maria," I said, catching the pride in her eyes. The afternoon drifted by in the same old pretend calm. Brandon bragged about his yacht. Sienna kept snapping photos. Mom sipped wine to dodge the tension. Dad stayed glued to his phone. I sat and watched. I wasn't the daughter begging to be heard anymore. I was someone who knew I was about to flip the board. When Mom called everyone to the dining room, I took a deep breath. Tonight, that long table with the white lace tablecloth wouldn't just serve turkey. It would be a battlefield. And I was ready for the moment my family would have to face the truth. That dinner table looked like it walked out of a luxury home magazine. A dark glossy wood table with a bright white lace runner. Wedgwood plates saved for special days. Scented candles glowing in silver holders. A 25-pound turkey sat in the center, skin golden and crisp, with mashed potatoes, stuffing, and pumpkin pie close by. It all seemed perfect at first, but I could feel tension hiding under every smile. My mom sat at one end. My dad sat at the other. Brandon took the seat close to him, full of confidence. Sienna sat across, phone in hand, filming the Mitchells' special Thanksgiving. Me, as usual, I was placed far from my father, near my mom. That seat said everything. After the pumpkin soup was served, my dad stood up and raised his glass of red wine. His voice boomed like he was at a shareholders meeting. "This year, I have an important announcement. A decision that will change this family's future." The whole table went quiet. Brandon straightened his back, sure he was about to get more power. Sienna swung her phone toward Dad. Mom set her glass down fast, her face tight. Dad cleared his throat and paused for effect. "After months of negotiation, I've decided to sell Mitchell Software. The deal will close right after the holiday. The buyer is a tech investment company called Summit Technologies." Silverware clattered. Brandon swallowed wrong and started coughing. "You can't be serious. This company belongs to our family. It should be mine." Sienna's mouth fell open. She turned to her phone and whispered, "Oh my God, you guys. Dad just said he's selling the company. Mitchell legacy gone." I sat still. My heart raced, but my face stayed calm. This was the moment I'd waited for all decade. Dad held up a hand for Brandon to be quiet. "This is the best path forward." Summit offered $50 million. That's generous, while our market share is slipping. Most of the money will go to a tech education foundation. The rest will let your mother and me retire comfortably. Brandon slapped the table, his voice hard. "You promised this company would be mine." Sienna started to cry, dabbing her mascara while angling her phone to capture the perfect drama. My mom stayed silent, but her eyes slid toward me. She must have noticed I wasn't surprised. She asked softly, "Lauren, you're not shocked?" Everyone turned to me. I set my spoon down, sat up, and kept my voice steady. "Just one question. Dad, who's the real buyer?" My father smiled with pride, like a general after a victory. "Summit Technologies. A young firm with potential. They'll pay handsomely, and the Mitchell name will live on through the foundation." I nodded slowly, then looked him in the eye. "Then there's something you should know. Summit Technologies is me." The room froze. I could hear the hallway grandfather clock ticking. Brandon dropped his glass. Red wine bled across the white cloth like a stain of blood. Sienna stared, hands shaking around her phone. My mom's mouth opened, her hand still hovering over her Chardonnay. My dad went rigid, his face shifting from shock to anger. He tried a thin smile. "Don't play games, Lauren." I took a small metal case from my bag, opened it, and slid a card across to him. The print was clear: Lauren E. Stone, founder CEO, Summit Technologies. I held his gaze and spoke clearly. "I built Summit from nothing. And Dad, this deal was already done before you even saw it coming." In that moment, Thanksgiving went silent. The candles flickered. The smell of turkey hung in the air. But it was all just a backdrop for the truth. The Mitchell family had just lost their empire, and it landed in the hands of the child they had dismissed the most. After I set the business card down, the room turned heavy. The candles kept burning, light flickering off the crystal glasses, but nobody was thinking about turkey or pie anymore. Every eye was on me. Brandon broke the silence first. He jumped up, chair crashing back, his glass shattering on the floor. "What the hell is this? You're lying. Summit is a giant corporation. There's no way you're running it." I looked at him, my voice steady. "I used another name. Lauren Elizabeth Stone. You might know that name. That's me." Sienna still had her phone up, live streaming to thousands. Her voice shook, but she knew how to make it dramatic. "Do you guys hear this? My sister just admitted she's the CEO of Summit Technologies. God, my family just turned into reality TV." My mother, Evelyn, reached out and covered the lens.
"Turn it off, Sienna.
"This is family business." She lowered the phone, reluctantly. But I knew that clip had already started to spread. My father gripped the edge of the table, his face flushed red.
"No."
"I don't believe it. This is some childish revenge. You could never get past me or the board." I met his eyes and spoke clearly. "You already signed. The board approved it. Summit now owns Mitchell Software. Everything is legal." Brandon lunged forward, pointing at my face. "You set us up. You stole this company from our family." "Not stolen," I said, cold. "A lawful acquisition. If you want, we can talk about deals that really aren't legal." He froze, color draining from his cheeks. I opened my laptop and slid a printed packet toward him. "You think I didn't know? $300,000 in embezzlement through fake vendor accounts. All traced back to the computer in your office. I have the receipts." The table exploded. My mother gasped. "Oh God, Brandon." He flushed deeper, veins standing in his neck. "You can't prove it." "I can," I said, tilting my head, holding his stare. "But I'm not dragging the whole company down just to haul you into court. I want you to understand this. Your power game is over." Sienna, teary seconds ago, switched tones in a heartbeat. Her eyes lit up like she'd spotted an opportunity. "Lauren, what if I work with you? I've got over 1 million followers. I can turn this story into an amazing media brand. You'll be the mysterious female CEO, and I'll be the bridge to the public. People will go crazy for it." I let out a laugh, half bitter, half pity. "Do you actually want to work, or do you just want more content for Instagram?" She shrugged, all innocence. "What's the difference? Content is work." My mother set her glass down, her voice shaky but firmer than usual. "Lauren, I was wrong. I let your father belittle you for years, and I didn't protect you. I just stayed quiet and poured another drink. Seeing you today, I realize how strong you are." That admission made me pause. I wasn't ready for real regret from her. My father slammed his hand on the table, his voice a hiss. "Enough. Choose right now, Lauren. Be my daughter, or be the one who stole my company. You can't be both." I took a breath and looked at him calmly. "You're wrong. I've always been both. You were the one who refused to see it." I watched him falter for a beat. Then he shot to his feet, the chair scraping hard against the wood. "This conversation is over. I'm calling the lawyers." He stormed out, his study door slamming like thunder. My mother followed, her eyes lingering on me, half sad, half hopeful. Brandon growled his way out. Sienna had already posted a vague clip with a caption, "Family Empire in Flames."
Stay tuned.
The dining room was just me and the candlelight. The table was still loaded with food, untouched. I sat there, tasted a cold pecan pie bite, and understood. This wasn't a family dinner anymore. This was a battlefield, and I'd just won the opening round. The next morning, the Mitchell house sat in a heavy quiet. The silver plates and crystal glasses were gone, but the chaos from dinner still hung in the air, like red wine soaked into the tablecloth. I walked downstairs with a coffee Maria had slipped into my hand and looked out the big window. The perfectly cut lawn was dusted with a thin layer of fog. My father appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking nothing like the powerful man from last night. His hair was messy, dark circles under his eyes. The suit was gone, replaced by a turtleneck sweater. He didn't say hello, just a short order. "My study.
Now."
I followed him into the dark wood office I was almost banned from as a kid. Awards lined the walls. Photos of him shaking hands with politicians and big-name executives. In all those frames, I wasn't there. He sat behind the big desk, fingers laced. His voice was rough but direct. "The lawyers confirmed it.
The deal is closed."
The board voted. "It's all legal." I nodded.
"Right."
"You can't undo it." He let out a long breath and, for the first time in years, looked straight at me. "How did you do it? No name. No early funding. No connections. How did you build a company like that?" For a moment his eyes weren't contempt. They were curious. I kept it short and firm. "I started with small contracts. Lived on instant noodles for 3 years. Old apartment. 80-hour weeks. I built the product you dismissed. Then I grew it, bought small companies, and step by step took control of the supply chain. You called it an academic fantasy. I call it vision." He was quiet a long time, then gave a slow nod. "Maybe I was wrong, but Brandon has been loyal to the company. He's been here for 10 years. I didn't hesitate. Brandon stole $300,000. I have proof. If I hadn't acted in time, the damage would be worse." His face went pale. He braced his hands on the desk, like the weight of the truth had landed on his shoulders. For the first time, he looked older than his age. I softened my tone. "I'm not here to destroy Brandon. But he's out of his role. He returns the money. If he wants back in, he studies, he starts over." He gave a small nod, voice unsteady. "Then what about me?" I took a breath and said it straight. "You'll be chairman emeritus. No operating power, but you'll have an office and an advisory voice. You're still part of the legacy, just not absolute power." His eyes flickered between pride and relief. He turned to the window, looking at the garden in the pale morning light, and spoke so softly I had to lean in. "I always thought I was protecting you by keeping you out. I thought you'd fail in this brutal world. The truth is I was wrong. I stayed quiet as a wave of complicated feeling rose in me. Not victory. Not revenge. A small crack in the cold wall between us. At last he turned back and held out his hand. Then welcome to the new CEO of Mitchell Summit Technologies. I took it. Our first handshake as equals. To me, it wasn't the end of a war. It was the start of something true. For the first time, he actually saw me. 6 months later, the old Mitchell software building had a brand new sign. The shiny letters read, Mitchell Summit Technologies. I stood in the main lobby, watching employees move quickly through the bright open space where dark wood walls had been replaced with glass. A new era had truly begun. My father, now chairman emeritus, no longer held the same power. But to my surprise, he found joy in mentoring. He spent time guiding young staff, telling stories about those garage startup days with my grandfather. Sometimes he even brought longtime clients straight to me. And in his eyes, I caught glimpses of the recognition I'd craved my whole life. Brandon, after being exposed for fraud, stepped back. He returned the money and signed up for an MBA. Shockingly, now and then, he called me for advice on strategy. His voice didn't carry that old arrogance anymore. It was curious, even humble. Sienna found a better stage. She became the face of brand media, her following skyrocketing thanks to the mystery CEO sister and rebel influencer sister story she spun into an empowerment campaign. I used to roll my eyes, but eventually I had to admit her influence actually brought real value to the company. And my mother, Evelyn, the woman who once hid behind her glass of wine, joined a nonprofit supporting women entrepreneurs. Over lunch one day, she told me, I don't want other mothers to make the same mistake I did. I stayed quiet too long. Hearing that, I knew change had touched more than just the company. It had touched the family too. The next Thanksgiving, we sat around the table again. No more of Dad's monologues. No more empty bragging. Just a warm dinner where everyone truly listened. I raised my glass, looked around at my father, my mother, Brandon, and Sienna, and felt something deep. Success isn't only sweet revenge. It's also the power to heal. I had built an empire from nothing. But the real victory was this. For the first time, my family finally learned how to see each other.